What's going on, fish heads? Welcome back to another Waterbox Live here on Wednesday afternoon at 12 today, not 1 p.m.
You never know.
Yeah.
Welcome back. We're giving away 2 shirts today.
As always.
Yep, so make sure you are engaging in the comments, ask questions, post stuff, talk to people. That is the currency to win. So 1 on YouTube, 1 on Facebook. So make sure you're being real active in there.
Yep, absolutely.
So,
if you guys haven't already, make sure you smash that like button too. Helps us out tremendously. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell as well.
Don't want to miss out on anything.
If you're on Facebook, share the stream.
Yes, you can share on Facebook.
Yes.
So do that. And you know, we're actually gonna be taking comments and questions throughout the whole show. So definitely just keep dropping them in there. They're gonna pull them and put them up as they can. So we'll be answering stuff as we go along. Because today we're talking inverts. The INFINIA has done its cycle. It is time to add the first set of cleanup crew, which after you do a cycle is your first step. Just a quick kind of side note on cycling. We are big supporters of fishless cycling.
Right.
So don't put fish in there to do the cycle. It's very dangerous for them. You don't want to cause harm to animals if you don't have to. So fishless cycling, basically, you're putting in fish food, some kind of waste product, and dosing bacteria to build up the bacteria column, testing your water, make sure no ammonia, no nitrite. Then you can kind of move forward with your first step, which is adding some of your cleanup crew.
Yep.
So don't put harmless animals in to cycle your aquarium. That's a very outdated method.
Yep, that is the way they did it long, long ago. You don't need to do that anymore.
Yep, so we've been doing that for a few weeks. And what I'm doing is I put back. We're back.
We're back on YouTube.
All right, so sorry for the interruption. We're back on YouTube. I think
Yeah,
we're still working on Facebook.
I don't know where we got cut off, but we were talking about.
What was the last thing we said, guys? Let us know.
I saw it over here that it killed, but we should be back on both.
Okay.
I don't know what happened there.
All right,
Internet
so
hiccup.
yep, internet hiccup. If you want to let us know what we were talking about last, we need to kind of repeat anything or not. We're talking about the cycling process, but we're going to add inverts over into the INFINIA and kind of talk about which ones are best for when you first start your aquarium, which ones you don't want to add right away, and go ahead and put the first batch into the INFINIA.
Yeah, and then guys, again, I want to encourage you, please, if you have any questions about the topic today, about anything about Waterbox, just really anything you might have around aquariums or anything like that, definitely put it below. Again, we give away a few things every week, so we want to encourage you guys to interact with us. That's why we're here live. So whether you're on Facebook or YouTube, we're going to take as many questions as we can. And if you haven't already, smash that like button.
All right,
Destroy
we're going
it.
over to the INFINIA and start talking about some crabs and
Cool.
snails and stuff. You see, INFINIA's looking nice. Like I said, we've gotten through the cycle process. We don't. All right, just gonna turn on the lights because I guess it's really dark over here. And then we'll get some of these guys added on in. There we go. All right. So for your cleanup crew, we're gonna add a mix of snails and a few crabs. And I like to try and put in, if you're kind of putting in inverts all at one time, start with your snails, let them get a chance to get upright. We're gonna go through the ones that we're adding, why, you know, the differences and stuff like that. So first we're gonna start with sand cleaners. These guys are really important. They're gonna keep your sand stirred up and clean. You always kind of go through a little bit of a diatime process in a new aquarium. That's normal, but they will help as well. And we've talked about, there's 2 different types for Nacerius. And when you go to the store, you're gonna be like, oh, well, these are $1 something, these are $5. What's the difference? And I'm gonna show you here. So you have basically what are Tongan Nacerius, and then you have what are called Vibex Nacerius. So these are the Tongan. You can see the size difference is quite dramatic. These will get bigger. They will cost you more, but they're bigger. They do more work. And then this is your Vibex. They do not get as big. So you'll see there's a decent price difference when you get them. I prefer the bigger ones when you can, but you know, in a lot of tanks we'll just do kind of a mix. So you'll see that these probably are gonna cost like 3 to 4 times as much. So you got like your Tongan versus Vibex Nacerius. And these guys have already been acclimated to the tank. So I'm gonna go ahead and put these guys in first, grabbing out what I can. And great thing about Nacerius is their whole job is just turning over the sand, cleaning it. They'll eat up kind of fish waste. Favorite thing about these is calling the zombie snails. So they're gonna be under the sand. You don't even hardly know that you have them in there. You go and put fish food in and suddenly you have all these little snorkels coming up, and they're just come flying out of the sand bed like little zombies, coming out for your food. All right, I grabbed a lot of them. So anytime you put snails in, I always recommend to have something. I got a little cool coral pointy stick that is my little snail flipper. And I'm just gonna go ahead and drop these guys in. You're coming over that side. And then just to help them out, like in this area and stuff, a lot of times can flip themselves, but just give a helping hand. Especially if you have crabs in here. Not that crabs are necessarily overly aggressive, but if there's a helpless snail, they might take advantage. So just kind of get them in upright. And you see these guys are gonna quickly start burying into the sand. And all day, all night, they're just traveling through, cleaning up, stirring it up. It helps your sand from being compacted. They eat the waste and stuff that comes into your sand bed. So they're very beneficial in here. And this tank here is the 5-foot INFINIA, and I'm adding between these type of Nicerius roughly about 15 between the Tongan and the Vibex here. Got a couple more of those to throw in. You'll see these guys are already disappearing. You can spread them out more along the sand bed if you want, but it doesn't really matter. They're going to make their way through. You see that guy's already gone. These big guys are making their way through. So usually all you ever see is sometimes that little snorkel sitting up from the sand bed. Like I said, unless you put in food, and then they come running. Another good one that is going to be for sand bed, that's pretty much their whole purpose, is conchs. These guys are best for medium to larger tanks. Don't put a lot in. So here we have a conch. They usually get to be about 3 inches long, and we got a little kind of, because sometimes they're going to the fighting conch. These guys are purely in the sand, but they get bigger, so they're good for medium to larger tanks. But even in this big tank, we're only going to start with one because it's still very new. There's not a whole bunch for them to eat. I'm going to flip him on over. These guys are pretty cool because they a lot of times will stay where you can see the top of their shell, and then they have these nice little eyeballs that come sticking out of their shell. So even in this, in this size big tank, you only need a couple of them mixed along with things like Nicerius for the sand bed. So don't overload on these in the beginning of your tank. All right, continuing on with sand cleaners. Sarah snails are great for small, medium, large, doesn't matter. Great thing about these is they do the sand, but they'll also come out, they'll get on the rock, they'll get on the glass. They're known for eating different types of nuisance algae. So they're extremely versatile, and they don't get real big. So even nano tanks, they are awesome. There's Sarah snails, you got regular and dwarfs. These are regulars, so they'll get probably about 1.5 inches or so long. And then there are dwarf ones that stay probably like 1 inch or less. And I have the regular size ones because of the size tank. And these guys cannot flip themselves. So once again, just make sure, put them in, flip them over. But they'll get on glass, rock, sand. These are a really, really good one to have. And they're not overly expensive, which is great too. So those are all kind of in place, and they'll start moving their way in. So those are your best beginner ones for sand cleanup. These can go in newer tanks. Just don't overload your inverts in the very beginning, because you're going to have a lot of them starve and die off if you put too many in. That 1 per gallon, big cleaner packs, don't start with something like that. It's going to be way too many for your tank. And then for our rock and glass, we have 2 different ones here. I know we've talked about them in previous. My absolute favorite is Trochus snails. These guys get pretty good size, as you'll see. Good thing about these is they're very active. They do really well in a home aquarium. They tend to actually reproduce as well. And they can flip themselves over because they have a very long body. And if they fall, they can right themselves.
They're baby Garys.
They are baby Garys. If anyone knows Gary, we have a huge Trochus. So they actually can get very, very large. Generally, you don't see them that big, though. And then the other one, little Astrea snails. These guys are really popular because they're cheap compared to a Trocus. A Trocus is gonna cost you probably $6 each. These, probably like $2. But the thing is, a lot of times they have a very short body. They cannot flip themselves back over when they fall. So they tend to become crab food sometimes. And they just don't tend to usually live as long or be quite as good of cleaners. But, you know, we're just doing kind of a mix of both. Trocus can be a little bit harder to find. And like I said, they are a more expensive option. So we got 3 Trocus and about 10 Asterisk snails going in here. Usually, just better, go ahead, place them on the rock. You can put them on the sand bed, just make sure they're flipped over and they'll find their way. But I think it's just easier to start them out on the rock. Place them around. Now, usually during your cycling time and until you have corals, you shouldn't be running your light too much. So there shouldn't be much algae. So even in this large tank, so we got 13 snails, and that's going to be plenty because I'm going to start ramping the light up a little bit as we get closer to adding coral. And they're just going to help kind of clean up any of the debris and any algae that does start to pop up on the rocks. But you definitely do not want to run full light cycle on an aquarium until it has corals in it. You can see Trocus are already on the move. They are very active, very good cleaners. And the bonus of them being able to flip themselves over is great because you don't want to have to be in your tank every single day flipping over snails. It's not the most fun thing to do. You see we got a rogue Nefarious. He's going up the glass. You see their little snorkel. So that's all the snails we're going to start with, and that's going to cover rock, sand, and glass. Don't ever think that your snails are going to take care of your glass completely. That's not what they're for. You're going to have to just manually clean your glass. You're really focusing on your sand bed and your rock and keeping that clean. The glass is pretty much for you to take care of on a regular basis. So don't go and put tons of snails in because your glass still has algae buildup on it. You're really never going to have enough to keep that clean. And then they're really going to starve because that's not a great source of algae for them. So we got all the snails in. They're all kind of upright going. Hermit crabs are a good scavenger. These guys are going to pick on the rock. They're going to go along the sand, eat fish food, pick at algae, hair algae, slimes. And they are just going to stay really, really busy. They are somewhat opportunistic, so make sure you're not putting too many in and that your snails are kind of kept upright because if they need a food source, they will find it. And sometimes that equals your snails. Or they will actually fight each other for shells because they don't grow their own shell like a snail does. So you do want to, as you add snails in, if or hermit crabs, if a snail dies, you know, put the shell back in, get extra shells for your hermit crabs from your local pet store so that they have options to move into because they will actually fight over shells. If one crab says, I like yours, you might actually just try and fight them and take it. These guys. One down.
Jess, what's your opinion on not having crabs in the system? There was a question that came through.
Yeah, I mean, you do not have to have hermit crabs, but I do think they're beneficial and picking the right one. So there are some that are more aggressive than others. Usually if you go with blue legs, red tips, red legs, those are not overly aggressive and they're more herbivore than they are carnivore. So, you know, they're not actively going to be seeking out to try and kill anything. Like I said, they're opportunistic. If a snail is upside down and stressed and hasn't been uprighted, possibly on the verge of dying, they're going to get it. If a coral is on the verge of dying or starting to decay, you're going to find hermit crabs on it. They did not kill it, but they're there to clean it up. But they're not absolutely necessary, but their little tiny claws do a lot for getting in all the crevices of the rock, cleaning up fish food, fish waste. So I do find that they're very beneficial. So for the INFINIA, that's all we're going to go with on your first set of cleanup crew. We're not putting in too many. I'm still going to put in the fish food a little bit each day to keep that cycle strong, and making sure that they have something to eat. So if the hermit crabs are hungry, they're not searching out something to eat like a snail if they have to. So.
Excellent.
But don't be scared of snails. They're not bad. They're opportunistic. So
Yeah.
don't give them
You
the
mean crabs?
opportunity. Huh?
Crabs?
Crabs.
Yeah.
Yep.
Again, you guys, I see a lot of you joining us here about midway through. If you haven't already, smash that like button. We're giving away a couple shirts like we always do.
Yep.
We want your questions. We're going to try to get to as many of them as we can, but the currency to win here is questions. We'd love for you guys to engage with us. Share the stream if you can. If you're on Facebook, we're taking your questions as well. So.
Yep, we love answering your questions, helping you guys out with anything you guys are doing with your tanks. So definitely we talked about what you should add to your aquarium, especially in the beginning instead of your inverts and stuff. But there's also a lot of ones that you should not start out with.
Yeah, to stay away from when
Stay
your
away
tank's new.
from, don't put these in the very, very beginning of your aquarium. On topics of snails, turbos.
Yeah.
Stay away from turbo snails. They're great if you have a need for them. They are workhorses when it comes to hair algae and larger, amounts of algae in a tank. They're very big. They need a lot of food. They fall over. They don't get up.
Yeah.
They're, and if you don't have a lot of algae in your tank, they're going to starve.
Yeah.
And when a turbo snail dies, it's disgusting, and it's a lot of waste product because they're very meaty snail.
Especially
you
don't
could
want
say.
that in a new system.
Exactly, and there's no way, unless you were running your lights full cycle during, full timing through this whole thing, that you should have that much algae when you start putting in your cleanup crew. So pretty much guarantee turbo snails will starve off and die.
Yeah.
So you don't want that in there. So just avoid those unless you need them down the road for a hair algae problem or something similar. And then for like crabs, emerald crabs, same thing with them. They need a lot of food. They're usually great for bubble algae, hair algae, stuff like that. They are extremely opportunistic to where if you don't have enough food for them, they're going to take your snail down. Like,
Yeah.
they're good for their purpose, but they're not meant to be in a very beginning of a tank because you just don't have enough stuff for them.
Cool. I don't know if you guys can pull up a picture of those or not, or
A what?
like a turbo snail, so these guys can see what they look like. If not, no big deal. But
Turbo snail, emerald, and then, shrimp, like cleaner shrimp, blood shrimp. Don't put those in the very beginning. They're more sensitive. Wait until
Yeah.
your tank's established. You've got some coral in there before adding any decorative or fancy shrimp in there.
cool.
Is he pulling them up?
They're laughing.
They're working on it.
I like to throw them for a loop every once in
I
a while.
know. You're like, pull these up. Oh, there's a
It's a
turbo.
cartoon turbo snail.
He was fast.
But they're right there in the middle, not that one.
No.
Two to the right, or even one to the right.
Yep.
Yeah, there you go.
So yeah, they have a big round shell. They get very large. They need a lot of algae, and they cannot flip themselves over. So don't add those in the beginning. Emerald
Yeah.
crabs, fancy shrimp, fancy hermit crabs too. Like there's Halloween hermits and like electric blues are beautiful, but they're bigger. They still need more food than you probably want to start putting it into a new tank. So just wait to add stuff like that in there as you go. For your sand cleaners, cucumbers are really good cleaners, but they need a more established tank. So just don't add that kind of stuff in the very beginning. Wait until you're down the road a month or two, and then start adding in those other type of inverts to the system.
Cool.
Questions?
Great advice.
Questions?
Thoughts on a no crab cleanup crew? Thinking about snails only. Crabs are just too unpredictable. So that's kind of in line with what I
Yeah,
asked
that's
you.
what we just kind of talked about over there. You can definitely do no crabs, but if you pick the right ones, they're really not.
It's not an issue.
They're not trying to come and kill your snails if they are proper number of them, proper type.
Richard's asking, is there a general rule of thumb for the number of snails, crabs, etc., to add based on aquarium size? This is a very popular question when
It
we have
is.
this topic.
No,
Not
there's
easy
not.
to answer either.
There is no set guide because every tank is so different. So like even just take like a tank that just finished its cycle. The INFINIA right now has almost no algae. A little bit of diatoms on the sand, but that's it because I'm not running lights on it during the cycle time except for like an hour or so a day. If you then were actually running your lights, you would probably have some kind of algae, so you could probably put a little bit more in the beginning. For established tanks, you have to base it upon what your tank needs. You know, if you notice you have a little bit of hair algae, if you know your sand is getting a little bit dirtier, rule out nutrient issues, nitrate, phosphates. But then you can adjust your cleanup crew from there at a small amount at a time. Give them a few weeks to work on it, see what they do. If you add too many at once and you go like, I need 100 hermits and 50 snails according to this cleanup crew pack, 50% of them, 50% of them are probably dead in the first week. So don't overload them, because then you now have spiking nitrates and issues because your cleanup crew died, and your husbandry has a lot to do with it.
Yeah.
So, you know, even in, that's our LX here, 7-foot, 320-gallon tank. I'm going to say in total, there's 10 snails in there. You know, I have a good amount of stuff for the sand bed, but I just don't need that many snails because we keep the nutrients in check, you know, all of that. Whereas some tanks, you might need a whole bunch more because you do have nutrient or algae problems.
Yeah.
So, and your cleanup crew dies off over time. So you add them in, you know, every month or two, you might notice, oh, I'm getting a little more algae. Oh, I've lost some of my cleanup crew. I just need to add a few more to kind of bounce it back up.
Yeah,
So.
and it's just like when you're with a lot of things with a saltwater aquarium, like if you're monitoring your corals, a lot of it's a visual. So even with your inverts, it's a visual thing. Just you really just have to keep a close eye on the system and see what needs adjusting.
But do not buy packs that are rated by gallon.
Right.
Because you're going to waste a lot of money and a lot of inverts are going to die and probably cause you more trouble in the long run.
Yeah, you don't want that.
Yeah.
William's asking, what's the difference between blue and red scarlet hermit crabs?
So, all right, you got blue legs, you got red legs, and you have scarlets. So, depending on those, blue leg and red legs, or red tips, a lot of times they go by, or a smaller snail, generally the cheaper, you know, $2, $1.50 to $2 snails, good cleanup crew. And they're omnivores, so they'll kind of pick at fish food, algae, all of that. And then you have scarlet hermit crabs, which are bright red legs. And they're beautiful, great cleaners. They're gonna cost you probably $5 or $6 a piece. So they're more of like a decorative. Add some in there just to do some color. They have the same kind of cleanup ability, but the scarlets just have a lot more bolder color and get a little bit bigger. So I love scarlet hermits, but you know, you can't stock your whole tank with scarlets at $6 a piece, usually.
So in regards to like how opportunistic one or the other is, are they basically the same, or is there one that might maybe be a little bit more aggressive?
I would say if I had to pick between like blue legs, red tips, and scarlets, blue legs can be a little bit more aggressive, possibly. But I think it still really depends on their food source, how many you have in there. You know, if you have too many and there's not food,
They're going to go
find
after
it.
what they can.
Yeah, or if you don't have enough shells, if you don't have shells for them to move into and they like your snail shell, it's a matter of housing at that point, and they're going to try and overtake it.
Cool. Thank you, William. Sandra's asking, once the cycle is complete, i.e. measurable nitrates, should you or shouldn't you not perform a water change? And if yes, what percentage do you recommend?
It really depends on what your nitrate level ends up after your cycle. It depends on really how hard you cycled it. You know, I find that using the fishless cycle with feeding fish food and using bacteria, you generally aren't going to end with really high nitrates. You know, now if you like put a ton of food in, you know, you may with it. So it really depends on what your nitrate level ends up being, because if it's going to be a reef, you really want to keep it probably like 10. So, you know, if your nitrates end at 20, you do like a 50% to bring it down before you start adding stuff in there. It just really depends on the overall number you end up at and where you want to get it down to.
Right on. The bomb shizzle says, INFINIA question. Can the control center be installed on either side of the cabinet like the Reef LX? Doesn't say on the website, but I'm guessing it can be, but it cannot be.
Nope.
The way that that cabinet is configured is it's not necessarily, I guess, I don't know the right word for it right now. Long story short, the panels are fixed on the other side, so no, they are. But we tried to put it in a good location when it comes to like where your cords need to run and everything, so.
Yeah.
Richard Wise is asking, for hermit crabs, how many empty shells should be available per crab?
Well, that's a good question. I've never really kept a track of it.
Yeah.
I've always just made sure that, like I said, if snail dies, clean out the shell, put it back in there if it's appropriately sized, and you know, just have a sprinkling of them around. Like, they aren't constantly looking for a new shell. It takes time for them to like grow into a bigger one. So I don't think you necessarily have to have a shell per crab. Even it's just make sure they're around. If you notice that they tend to be fighting more, that, you know, 2 hermit crabs going after each other more frequently, perhaps it's time to add a couple more shells in there. They don't like what you have to offer. Like, they're very picky about their house sometimes. Like, you know, like, they could have shells in there, and if there's a particular one they want, they're going to fight for that. So I don't have a good rule of thumb for that, but just put some in there, see how it goes.
Cole's asking, can turbo snails have apstasia on them? I've seen that before.
Yes, they can.
They're large enough to be a
They're a moving
mobile
rock.
home for an apstasia.
They
Sometimes
are.
zoanthids or other things too.
Yeah, I mean, corals can grow on them, algae can grow on them, aptasia can grow on them. I mean, turbo snails, so like a regular turbo snail can get, I don't know, 2 inches across easy. And then there's zebra turbos. These things can get huge. So it's a pretty big surface area. Almost anything can grow on it.
Yeah.
At that point, if you have an aptasia on a turbo snail, you know, a peppermint shrimp might chase them around and get it. But I think your best bet is probably take that snail out, scrape and brush off the shell outside of the tank so that aptasia doesn't like reproduce and out of stress, and then put it back in, and then hopefully it should be gone. Kind of scrape it off.
Frank's asking, I've had feather dusters showing up in my tanks. Is that a good or a bad thing?
They're not harmful in any way, but if you have a lot of them, this tiny little hitchhiker filter feeder ones, is basically you have too much nutrients. So their population can only grow to what's available in the water column, phytoplankton and zooplankton, waste product. So if you have this big outburst of feather dusters, the little tiny ones, usually it means that you have very nutrient-rich water. It's kind of the same with sponges and tunicates. If you have this large quantity, there's too much naturally available food that allows them to grow that much.
I don't know if you guys put this question in there, Keenan, but I'm going to bring it up anyways. I did see someone ask, why don't we have lids anymore? Well, okay, so I want to take this one because it's kind of, people are wondering, well, why don't they have the lids anymore? So we used to have the D&D jump guard lids. The reason we don't have them is because the customer experience wasn't really that great.
No,
so
feedback not great.
It was bad enough to where we were like, we just don't need to offer these. But what I can tell you is keep an eye out in the near future. We have some cool things that we're working on. But yeah, for now, we just don't have that jump guard bundle. It just didn't work out real well for our customers. And there are other solutions though. There's people that make custom lids, et cetera, in the meantime.
Yeah.
Ur's asking, do peppermint shrimps actually eat apstasia or is it a myth?
Heck yeah, they do. They're great. So manually, if you can control your aptasia, go for it. They make products for that. You know, it can be very difficult because they tend to have small ones all over the tank that you don't see until they start to get bigger. It's kind of a revolving problem. And if you don't kill them properly, when under stress, an aptasia tends to spawn out and create more. So if you don't kill them correctly with the product, or like a lot of people say, use boiling water, use cow cluster, that kind of stuff, you know, that's not as advised. Lemon juice, even people said lemon juice.
Pickling lime, all sorts of different things. Yeah.
So if you do it and they stress, you don't kill them all the way, they tend to just send lots of babies all over the tank. So you can manually do it. But I find that, though, in some peppermint shrimp, usually in groups, they tend to hunt and travel better in groups, and they will take care of any ones that pop up, little baby ones you don't see under the rocks, and kind of maintain them. Biggest thing with peppermint shrimp is make sure they have a food source once they've eaten that. Fish food they'll grab at, so just make sure they're getting enough food because they are scavengers. Anything that's a scavenger can go after things it shouldn't if it needs food.
Cool, thank you for the question. Reefin Rican's asking, can you add snails and crabs collected from the beach?
Don't do it.
No.
Just don't do it. Nothing should be collected from the beach, ever. Not only just because that's things that need to go into the ecosystem where they're at, but also sand, water, fish, inverts, pests. They may not be compatible in your water time. I mean, for the most part, a lot of the stuff does not come from the United States.
Yeah.
I mean, majority of everything you find, except for some inverts, are coming from other parts of the world, or they're aquaculture, that kind of stuff. So they're not necessarily compatible, but there's a lot of predatory snails and crabs that may look like ones that are good.
Yeah.
Like you come in, you bring in your tank, and then they end up destroying stuff. They can be parasites, you know, and I think it is also illegal without a permit.
Yeah, I was just going to say permitting issues, regulatory issues. And if you can, look for aquacultured sources of them.
Yep.
You know, ORA has a good selection
Yeah.
that you can call them up and see where to get them.
Just don't risk it. It's not worth it.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. James asking thoughts on urchins.
They're cool. They're a lot of fun to watch. I don't know, he's laughing. And only problem that I have with urchins is well, I guess there's two. They steal stuff, which is cute. Unless it's something that you really don't want them to steal. Now, it's really fun when an urchin's walking around and he's got a little clump of zoas on him, or like some kind of soft coral, or there's a hermit crab on his back struggling for his life as he travels with the urchin. It's fun. But sometimes if your coral's not down, they're gonna knock them down, or they're gonna take it and then drop it somewhere.
Bulldozer.
Yes, and the second one is that they do graze on coralline algae. So if you don't have a lot of coralline algae, they are going to keep that from really spreading or growing. And, you know, I've even seen it with like the life rock. They'll take off the purple coloring of the rock as well.
Wow.
So they're great cleaners, but you just kind of have to keep in mind some of the things that they're going to do.
I think like a more established tank.
More established
fitting
for
for
sure. Bigger corals, ones that aren't loose. And then, you know, has enough coralline algae and stuff for them to be able to graze. And the thing is that when they graze on it, it does promote it to grow back faster and like better. But if you don't have enough of it, they eat it all before it can like continue it to like grow.
I got a question, and this is, you see these very commonly in the industry. What about sand sifting starfish?
In a big tank that's established.
Okay.
So they should, I would say at least probably like a 80 to 100 gallon well-established tank to put them into your sand bed, because they deplete a lot of good stuff too. They eat a lot of dirt, but they take the microfauna and stuff out.
Okay.
And they're not going to take fish food. They're not going to take anything else. So once they deplete out a sand bed, if it's not big enough or established, then they're going to slowly starve and die.
Cool.
So.
Good information. Russell's asking, what about freshwater cleaners? Get you some scuds.
Get some scuds. Yeah, so.
Sorry. That's my new favorite word.
It is. I totally lost my train of thought. Yeah,
Freshwater
so
cleaners.
They're scuds. They're like copepods for the freshwater world. Freshwater cleaners a lot of times is different types of snails. Be careful, because a lot of snails in freshwater are like massive reproducers and like overtake. So a good one is nearite snails. They're actually in salt and freshwater, but they can't reproduce in freshwater. So, you know, you can put them in there. They're not going to take over and have babies all over. And then you also have things like cherry shrimps, amano shrimp, and then, of course, fish cleaners in, you know, autocats, algae eaters, that kind of stuff. So there is actually a handful of freshwater options.
Cool. All good? Ready to give some stuff away?
All right. Got 2 shirts to give away. Remember, you got to be active in the comments, asking questions and all that stuff to qualify, or all that. So got some shirts to give away.
Ready to roll?
All right.
Waterbox drum roll. Christopher Coffins on Facebook and Jared N on YouTube. Congratulations, you guys. Email winners@waterboxaquariums.com. They'll get hooked up. And remember, guys, we give away stuff every week. It could be shirts, it could be gift cards. Sometimes it's aquariums. Sometimes it's,
never know.
you know, multi-$1,000 aquariums. You got to
We've
tune
done that
in.
quite a bit, yes.
Yeah. So make sure you guys, if you haven't already, smash the like button. I see a lot of you in here. That helps us out tremendously. As well as subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, because again, me and Jess are here every week.
Yep.
Live, taking your questions, talking about aquariums, husbandry, all that good stuff.
Yep. And next week we are talking about fish, because the INFINIA, the next step is to add some first fish in there. So we'll talk about kind of researching and choosing proper fish for your aquarium. We're going to add the fish into the INFINIA. You have to see and stay tuned for what we pick as our first group to go in.
Cool. So we'll see you guys next week.
See ya.
Thank you all for watching. Make sure you smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Remember, you can visit us online at waterboxaquariums.com.
We're live every Wednesday. Thanks for watching. See you next week.